I've been doing this work. I've been doing this work for 42 years and I love it. So I'm just working it part-time right now. I also have a small organic blueberry farm, and I lead a little bitty writing group in Murphy, and we have been meeting on Zoom the whole pandemic. So writing is my personal life. And I got inspired to write mostly by having things to say, and my connections with nature and with people are what keeps me having something to say.
That's
So here I
awesome.
am.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And especially over these trying times. I know it's been a little challenging for all of us. Jake, I've got you up on deck next. If you don't mind, share a little bit about where you're from, where you're at.
Absolutely.
What brings you here?
So I'm Jake Young. I have been writing pretty much all my life. My father, Gary Young, who's joining us, is also a poet as well as a fine arts printer. So I've been surrounded by poetry books as long as I can remember, and even before that. I really got into poetry pretty intensively in high school, took a little bit of a break somewhat to dabble in other genres when I was in college. So I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, but I went to the East Coast to Skidmore College in upstate New York, and fell back in love with poetry and ended up at an MFA program at North Carolina State. So I have spent some time out in Raleigh, North Carolina, loved my time out there. My first book of poems is largely started from that time, and you'll notice the wine barrels. That's because a big part of that book is about my time after the MFA program, when I moved back to California and worked in the wine industry for a few years. Spent 5 years working at a small boutique winery in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And after that, though, I really missed the world of poetry and decided to go back to school and get my PhD at the University of Missouri in English for poetry writing. And I'm very excited to announce that my dissertation from that project has just been published, and have to thank Patty and Robert and Redhawk for that amazing privilege.
Wow, I didn't know that that was part of your dissertation, but we're honored. And are you Dr. Young? Did you defend your dissertation?
I did. I don't usually go by Dr. Young, but yes.
Yay. Well, congrats. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
And next we've got Tim Peeler.
Hello.
Hey,
I'm Tim Peeler. I'm over here on Henry River Road in Hickory, North Carolina. I'm a retired educator after 28 years at CVCC. And I was working with Robert and Richard whenever they got this thing started a couple of years ago. I published 20 or so books, poetry, baseball poetry, regional baseball history, and the most recent one, this narrative art poetry book that I did with Redhawk, which hopefully I'll be reading from at some point here.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. We appreciate it. And just so that you know, Tim is also one of our senior editors here. So we're very pleased to not only have him as a colleague, but also as a published author. So thank you, Tim, for everything that you do for us. We appreciate it. And last but not least is Mr. Paul. Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself so everyone knows where you're at and what you've been doing for us.
Okay, I'm Paul Jones. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I've been here since 1977, but I started out in Hickory, North Carolina, where parts of my family have been since the 1750s. Although I left Hickory quite young, at about 18 months, and moved to Charlotte, where I did the first part of my growing up and my first part of my poetry publishing, really, with an underground magazine that ended up in court a few times and won each time in 1968. Then I went to NC State to get a computer science degree and Jake, it turns out you only need 4 years at NC State to teach for 42 years at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So I've been in Chapel Hill for that long. And all along I was publishing poetry. My first chapbook came out in the about 1990. It's called What the Welsh and Chinese Have in Common. And I periodically see rare copies by friends that have moved or died showing up on Amazon. I have an MFA from Warren Wilson College that I got in 1993. And I've published poetry right along, including ones that have ended up in cookbooks and travel anthologies, and in Best American Erotic Poems, 1800 to Present, a Scribner book that's out. And this is my first full-length collection, and I think most of the poems in this collection have also been published before, and in a couple of cases after the book came out.
Cool. Thank you. And congratulations, by the way, because we saw on Facebook you had mentioned that you got an award from, is it NC State?
Yeah, so I guess I could say a little bit about two things there, because I also do information technology and computer science. Those two things, while they're not directly in the poetry all the time, affect other things that I do with poetry. But this was North Carolina State Computer Science has a Hall of Fame for their grads, and apparently they don't check your GPA, and they don't check to see if you're going to give them any money, because they let me in.
Congratulations on that one. Escaping Giving Tuesday, that's good for you. Awesome. I'll tell you what, we are going to go into poetry readings, because I know every time we do these Zoom meetings, everyone sends in the chats, poetry readings, let them read. And there was a strategic reason why I had you and Paul, because I'm going to have you read first. We're going to ask all of our poets to read 2 of their poems that they would like to share with us. And Paul, if you don't mind, we're going to ask you to do your first 2 poems and maybe tell us a little bit about why you chose those poems.
Let me do the poems and we can talk about the others part later. The first one is called Clear Channel. It's my grandmother staked her lot in signs, Cleopatra Fortune, reader and canary breeder. She tugged me to her side and showed me her white bird. Through her few teeth, she hissed her words. The mildewed air washed her swollen ankles. She shuffled as if manacles kept her there. She dissolved into a chair. Give me your palm and you'll dream your true name, she said. But I made a fist and ran upstairs and dove under covers with the radio's blast pushed to my ear. A signal across the clear channel carried an earnest Cuban voice that warned of reds. Between ballads, someone sold olive oil, religion, and dark cigars. A crackle came, then a samba, and soon that stopped, and static grew like the language of the spirits I knew grandmother knew. Half naked, I half heard a hovering overhead, and nearly said, black wings, black day. The next thing was that song, beckoning. I tossed my little radio off the bed, let canary songs fill my head. The power went out. What I knew of darkness grew as thick as doubt. Against the blackness, I held out my hand until a step on the stairs creaked, grandmother. From the cool air, I took the name she said, and the music of late night bloomed glad. The next poem is a triolet called The Sign of Trees. What is the proper sacrifice to please the saint, our Lord, the sign of trees? I asked the ferns for their advice. What is the proper sacrifice? Lie here and dream of paradise. Sink into the soil like leaves. That is the proper sacrifice to praise our Lord, the saint of trees. I chose those poems because you told me I had 2 minutes, and one was rather long. It was Clear Channel, which is a poem that I particularly love and was at the North Carolina Literary Review a couple of years back. And the Saint of Trees is a triolet. It's a complex little form that I'm drawn to how forms speak, not forms as something themselves, but how forms have certain ways that they carry information in them. And I love that little heavily repeated line, and tried to shift voice and stuff in that. So that shows some of what I do. And you heard in Clear Channel, it's a much looser kind of form going on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. By the way, I'm noticing that people are saying things in the chat room, and I do want to make this an open forum. And if anyone's got questions, maybe we can ask you to ask them in the chat room, and we'll see them. But thank you, Paul. Those were very touching, and I kind of did tell the difference between the forms. So I'm proud. Next, we are actually just going to go in reverse order. So if you don't mind, Tim, you're next on deck.
Excuse me, I'm a little slow.
That's okay.
I want to read a couple things from my Redhawk book, and these poems kind of go together, and they're what really they set up the main plot points in this book. The book's a narrative arc, book of poems, and they show how what we may consider to be our distant past can be connected to the present. One Pardo visited what the white people would call the Catawbas in 1566, searching for a quick route to Mexico, carrying bags of Spanish doubloons. Before the day of struck silver pieces of 8, leaving for points farther west, they cut the coins into slivers and buried them in the clay shoals where the river hooked a hard left east. When Pardo's men failed to return, the coin shards lay undisturbed for over 400 years, till an old man wearing a red MAGA hat and a Heritage Not Hate t-shirt spotted something glinting in the sun. Enormous Little knew nothing of the conquistador Juan Pardo, of his voyage up the Wateree from what is now Paris Island. He didn't know that Pardo went east as far as Salisbury after his men had built Fort San Juan near what is now Morganton. He didn't know that he was called back to the coast to fight off a French expedition, or that in 1568, the natives surrounded the fort, laid siege, and then killed all but one man who had hidden in the woods. He didn't know that the site had recently become an important archaeological find, with multiple academics bringing teams of grad students to process what they discovered. He didn't know that the state had placed a historical marker in Morganton to lay claim to all that history. The only thing that Norm knew was that somebody left some coin in the river. And I'm not sure what to say about that. It's part of the story in the life and times of Jesus Christopher Duende. You have to get the book to read the rest.
I like how you called your book not poetry. Am I saying that right?
Yes, that's good. Yes. That's the form that I'm working in now, which is just really a book of, it's a narrative arc book where all of the poems fit into the overall story, which is really hard to do, but impossible if you're sending these out to magazines. They don't get it, but that's okay.
It's part poetry, part story. I got it. Yeah, so I mean, it is kind of, it's an interesting way to read poetry because it keeps you engaged due to the story nature of it. So kudos. Next we have Jake. Yeah, these comments in chat, make sure you're reading them because they're fascinating. Jake, if you don't mind, I'm going to put you up on next, okay?
All right.
You have to get your face in the picture.
I've got a couple poems for you here. Just a quick note, something about this collection that I should probably make everyone aware of is that each poem opens with an epigraph, excuse me. And so kind of a underlying or central theme is the idea of influence, of connectivity, and kind of the communication between texts and people that kind of connects us all. So this opens with an epigraph, and we'll get to it here in just a second. The poem is titled Harmonic Distortion. Music is an agreeable harmony for the honor of God and the permissible delights of the soul, by Johann Sebastian Bach. When I was 3, my father asked, what does James Brown say? And I shouted, ow, I feel good. At 5, I danced to Bob Dylan's harmonica on a splintered redwood floor, buckets placed about to catch the rain leaking through the roof. The dark, knotted beams with human faces hidden in the wood grains looked down at me, watched me like the boy who lived reflected in the windows behind the dinner table piled with magazines, poems, a calendar with appointments, teeth cleaning, surgery, taxes, music in the mountains. In 1993, after listening to Bach for the first time performed in a forested glen, all I wanted was to run, to persist as pure melody, a name echoing from someone's lips. The second poem is about working at a restaurant. For the 5 years that I was in Missouri working on my PhD dissertation, I worked part-time as a server and bartender. And this is a poem that came out of that experience. It's called After Hours. What took me completely by surprise was that it was me, from Emily Bishop's In the Waiting Room. The closing bartender mops behind the bar, ready to shut off the lights, ready for her own drink and soft sheets, ready to slip between 2 leaves rustling in this early spring air. I exhale the copper taste of a cash drawer, the flapped starched linen of the final table flipped for the evening, the silverware polished and set in neat rows below the napkins stuffed into wine glasses raised to the stars. It's long past last call. The stars are drunk and we all wander out. I am the water in the empty water glasses, the flame in the unlit candles. Earth removed for the bar's foundation and the siren that vanished in the air. The stars sing and I am the knife clipped to my front pocket and my keys clipped to the back, the dishes drying in the rack, the cat's bowl and the cat. Thank you.
Farmer bartender here. I felt that one. Thank you. Thank you, Jake. Those are very moving. Next, we have Miss Mary.
Oh, okay. So my 2 poems are from my book by Redhawk, Lyra, Poems of Woodland Woman. Now, Lyra is a character I made up, and she communes mostly with animals in nature. And so this is Lyra's magic. I whirl among 100 blueberry bushes, weave left and right, prune and preen. One with butterflies and bumblebees, circulate pollen, blossom to blossom. My brown hair reaches like the breeze, long locks of wands of magic. I grant 3 wishes. First, to cure the fungus that spreads disease to fruit all around. Second, to grow the berries plump like jewels of juice, health and joy. Third, wish for crows to feed from some other seed and fruit. Save the berries for one who walks the land. This next one is from the season we just left. As the veil grows thin, light frost settles on flat falls of mowed fields, grass now gray. One long layer of wood smoke crosses the cove, sign of Farley's fire warming the morning. Cold and warm meet in the same world. Fallen maple leaves crunch beneath my feet, give up on tree hold before red tinge travels in. Dog and puppy trot ahead, look for surprise. Red-tailed hawk sits full sun, high on a wire, then flies to the woods, hides in poplar and oak, takes no chances a human walks too close. Souls of deceased approach without fear, sharp focus, intuition in the living, senses spirit, asks blessings and help. All Hallows Eve approaches soon. So those poems just kind of show you the character of who this book is about.
I think people, if they were to get the book and read it, they'll understand it's a fairy story for me, you know, as I read it. It just, there's a very clear image of place, and it's where we live. So I thank you. Thank you for doing that.
And thank you, Pam.
Sure. And Schereeya, you are next.
Okay, hello everyone. I'll be reading two selections from Prayers and Pixies. My poetry is really inspired by nature. I think a lot of poetry is. So the poems in Prayers and Pixies were all kind of sorted into the 4 seasons and very kind of trees, nature, the elements. And some other poems that I've been writing more recently that I might get a chance to read later. I'm more in kind of my blue period, as you can see with my hair, kind of a space and colors inspired poetry. And I was going to say interestingly, I think it's interesting. You can decide. My poems are all kind of related to the world of the novel that I'm writing as well. And I'm at this place now where I always talk about my novel as the novel that I'm writing, and no one knows the plot. So I will keep that secret here as well. But the poems kind of have some kind of background in what's going on. The novel takes place 100 years in the future, so that makes sense. But the poems are sort of grounded kind of now-ish, if that's helpful. So I'll start with number 9, clocks. One thing above all is true. Time changes. Buds and blossoms transform to clocks that float instead of tick, that roam instead of march, that allow instead of constrain. Fast flower friends far afield from fledgling families find their fortunes further now, alone. A journey. Sailing over some small sea, the changed clock knows not itself at first and stares in wonder. Once yellow plumage, now white as down and just as soft, flits from puddle to mudbank to rock bed. Tiny tumbleweed, it takes a turn or two until warm earth womb accepts its last deposit. For my second poem, I will read from the summer section of the book. This one is called Wilderness 1, Wildflower. It's number 14. I thought I had seen wilderness before. Down south where I'm from, there's trees and fields for miles. Green on green, rolling on green until you arrive at cityfied concrete. Here in Pittsburgh, that's my toddler. Here in Pittsburgh, the green does not discriminate quite so much. It spills over concrete, over bridge and road alike, gobbling up brick buildings and spitting out industrial, empty, curious ruins. On one street, the green is forced to stay in, tapered edges, fading into perfectly pruned petunia hedges. I don't say bushes because bushes are wild, unkempt, untamed, and these hedges are not that. Bushes are one street over. The wild is connected so deeply with civilization that I'm honestly not sure if that pile of bricks used to be 1 story or 2. 1 or 2 stories high, I mean, because I can tell multiple stories lived here. Whenever I see a fallen house like this, I wonder what kind of person left it to return to wilderness. I think of someone who knows of resilience, of flowers that are so delicate that to press the petal too passionately would leave a bruise. But there they are, wild, expertly snaked between crumbling cinder blocks, delicate royalty lolling, lovely aloft their rigid throne. I imagine someone who knows creation cannot be tamed with meticulous structures and systems built to choke new growth, to blossom conformity. I visualize someone who's kin of bushes, of the wilderness. I feel my ancestors who moved here from the familiar field green of flat southern wilderness to the unknown forest green of a mountainous river town. I contemplate a green that doesn't discriminate, green that waits, bides its time until the system breaks when it can burst forth and reclaim that which it owns. I conjure a green so strong that it blooms out of concrete. Thank you.
Besides being my alliteration queen, seriously, those were amazing images that you brought. So thank you. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you. I forgot to say, I guess I did talk about what inspires these poems. The first one clocked was a commission for someone who was thinking about the changing experience of kind of growing up. I think they were kind of transitioning out of like a grad school space at the start of the pandemic and sort of moving into a new space. So they were just sort of reflecting on that experience of kind of changing and leaving friends behind and making new friends. And then Wilderness is actually inspired by some, honestly, just literally driving around the city. We drive around a lot. My husband is a real estate agent and he loves old houses. And so we kind of drive around and I look at the flowers and write poems and he looks at the houses and tries to sell them. And so there's just a lot of imagery. I take a lot of nature photos as well. And some of the photos are in my book. A lot of them are on my Instagram. And so that, kind of looking, just watching the green. I don't know, if you've never been to Pittsburgh, come to Pittsburgh, you'll see what I'm talking about. And you'll be like, oh, of course, that's exactly what Schereeya meant.
You know what, I'm going to grab you for a second here to ask you a question about these commissions. So for some of our poets out here who may not do that, tell us a little bit about when you say you do poems on commission, how does one do this?
Okay, so my background as a writer is in theater. I did most of my writing as writing scripts, characters, and that kind of thing. So I have a lot of familiarity with voice and telling stories and different genres and all of that stuff. And so between doing character things for my novel, character things for the plays, I just found that I've gotten pretty good at sort of reading people and being able to write their feelings into words. And so the commissions are, I run them literally, I can write them about whatever you want. Although sometimes I don't do hate poems. Sometimes I'm like, we'll see if you're really feeling it. We'll see what's going on. But sometimes I'm like, no, I cannot. But I read them about whatever you want them about, and I price them all, pay whatever you want, pay what you will. So some people can pay about $5. Some people pay like $85. it kind of depends on what people want to use them for. I've had one commissioned as an engagement. It was like red when someone proposed. And it was like a nice connection because it was someone who was going to propose at where I graduated, my university. I went to Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. And I also got engaged in Lexington, like on, so it was kind of a similar shared love story. One of them I wrote for a friend who was pregnant, but both of her parents died 2 years ago in the same year. And so was really struggling with kind of trying to bring those, the joy and excitement of finally having a child with the grief of her parents not being around. And that particular friend really likes Dungeons and Dragons. And so I wrote an RPG poem, which is kind of a second person, I'm telling this virtual reality story and you're sort of sitting in the seat. So I try to just get a sense of what people are looking to either portray or celebrate or kind of feel or experience. And then I write it and I kind of do one back and forth exchange of editing. Does this sound like what you were looking for? Is this on track with what you were, wanted to experience? And I've honestly had some phenomenal feedback. I never thought it would be, this exciting. I am opening up, I have a few slots open for Christmas and I'll probably do some again around Valentine's Day.
Good for you. And I'm just kind of curious, of our other 4 poets this evening, and I know we have a lot of poets that are just in the audience. Is anyone else out there doing commission pieces? Just curious. Okay, so Schereeya is giving you an idea, huh? Awesome. Thank you very much. We're going to move right on, and Mary, you're up on deck next. And we're going to ask just one question of Mary, and then we're going to ask her to do 2 poems, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The question we have for you has to do with poets that have inspired you. Is there a particular poet that you are fond of that, kind of helps you get your creative juices going? Someone that you like to emulate?
The one that comes to mind is Mary Oliver. And I think I'm unmuted. Yeah. So I love Mary Oliver, and I feel a connection with her. And a number of years ago, a friend, when someone special to me had died, sent me The Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. And I was so touched that someone would send me a poem, and then it was such a good poem. I delved more into Mary Oliver, and I also feel kind of kinship with Robert Frost. So, and also Naomi Shea of Nye. So those are some of my influences.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If we can ask you to indulge us and read another poem or 2.
Okay. So I'm glad you pointed out that my character Lyra is kind of a fairy, and I think of her as partly a fairy, partly a goddess. This is the very first poem of the book, so it gives you an intro. Wild and home. Lyra walked the road to her first home, back to the fence she once climbed over. First claimed herself wild and free, escaped beyond the bounds of youth. Met the past, a brick house, shrubs planted row by row, concrete paths, no creatures, no people played or strolled outside. Even birds did not fly, not a rabbit ran through. The tall steel fence still stood. She climbed it again, her wild spirit steady. Stopped a moment at the top, freedom remembered, renewed. To the woods she ran again, not a glance back. Found herself at Cherry Cove, close to her cabin. 3 deer stood center field, then romped the shallow creek to the wood and back. Whitetails in regal prance welcomed her. Rabbits and squirrels scurried about. Red-tailed hawks soared high and low, ceremony of embrace, because Lyra came home.
Hmm.
So this is my character, my little fairy. And this is a poem about her when she's been living in that nature place for a long time. Waltz. When the earth shakes with fear, and even sun and moon seem strangers, Lyra turns herself inside out, hides her spirit in a hollow log of fallen oak, waits for rabbits to run with glee. Strong-legged deer keep watch on the world, stand almost aloof, transfixed in wonder. The red-tailed hawk watches every rock, every blade of grass, almost reads her mind and want. Soft rains sift the air. Innocence gives birth. Jewelweed tea packs a poultice for every itch. Blooms of berries and passion flower purple Lyra's moments past peak of sunrise to shooting stars in the midnight hour. When Lyra feels the wind waltz in steps familiar, she returns to where butterflies and bluebirds dance the hours.
That's just magical. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate
you.
that. Jake, you're going to be up next. So I'll give you enough time to unmute. And just so that you know, we're just kind of doing round robins with questions, but here's a question I had for you, especially with your extensive background. And it's about your writing process. I'm just kind of curious if you could share with us, what would you say what is your writing style? Is there one that you kind of stick to? What's your writing process? Are you a daily writer? Do you write as you feel it? Just kind of curious, all that.
I am not a daily writer. I have had bouts where I have pressured myself into that as an exercise. But I typically, I will have a idea of, and it can be something small, it could be an image or a line or even something more guttural and an emotion that I will carry with me and carry it and add to it and let it turn itself into a poem. And at a certain point, I will realize that I have something worth writing down. Sometimes it'll come out as a rough draft of a poem. Sometimes, again, it's just a couple lines that I'll put down in my notebook and we'll come back to. And then at a certain point, I'll go through my notebook and I'll usually at this point have a few things that I have jotted down, and I'll spend an evening or an afternoon typing everything up. And that's where they go from kind of being proto poems or notes for a poem into kind of a very rough first draft. From there, I like to print my poems out. And every draft I typically go through by hand. I read them aloud. I think it's really important to hear your poems, not just see them on the page. And occasionally I will fiddle with things on the computer. I find that can be really helpful when I'm playing around with something like line breaks or trying to decide whether a poem should be in couplets or quatrains. But for the most part, I like to do most of my revisions by hand and then type those up again. I would say that in terms of how I describe my work, my style, I think of it as fairly image and narrative driven. Though there are certainly differences in my work. I was very focused on creating these kind of vignettes in my first collection that focused so much on my experience in the world of wine, and was really exploring concepts of our relation to land through the food and the wine that we drink and eat, and thinking about cyclical cycles of growth, birth, life, death, rebirth. The collection that just came out from Redhawk, my collection, All I Wanted, I allowed myself to be a little bit more philosophical, something that I really tried to kind of downplay in my first book. And so, although there's certainly still a lot of very narrative-driven poems in that collection, I also allow myself to play a little bit more with my background in philosophy and interest in philosophy and religion. So it's always a little bit different. I'm working on a new collection right now where I'm playing around a lot more with form, kind of experimenting with everything from prose poems to kind of modern English incantations of Japanese tankas and haikus, aphorisms. So I find myself at a certain point when I'm going through my kind of normative process of writing, that something has changed at a certain point, and I find that I've started working on a certain collection, a new project, as the book starts to take shape. And so while there's certainly kind of always an underlying process, the product has taken on new forms at different points in my writing life. And that's kind of been a fun thing to experiment and play around with and recognize.
That's really nice. And I appreciate the thoughtful response on that, because I knew of all 5 of our poets, everybody's got their unique style and their unique process. But with your academic background, I was a little bit more curious about where you saw yourself at. Would you grace us, please, with maybe another poem or two?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Lunchtime at the farmer's market. Our shells clacked on the plates. My tongue was a filling estuary. My palate hung with starlight. From Oysters by Seamus Heaney. A burly, white-bearded man in denim overalls wipes his blade on a cloth tucked into his apron string and hands me a paper plate with 3 glistening oysters. I drop a $5 bill into the wicker basket at the end of the bar and take a seat in the shade of an elm. The oyster shucker sharpens his knife, wipes away water, ice, and broken bits of shell from the counter at his stall in the market. How well he splits the shells in two, separates the oyster's foot from its hold so that the people in line, wearing sun hats, baskets hanging from their arms, can eat something still alive, savor the briny taste of the sea's affection, the cool sensation of the ocean's tongue against their own. So that's a very narrative kind of poem, one of those kind of, I think of them often as little vignettes. They just tell a very kind of small personal story. The next poem I want to read for you is also fairly narrative driven, but it plays a little bit more with kind of these philosophical concepts that I was saying I've allowed to sneak into this book a bit more than some of my previous work. This poem's called Before Burn Season Begins. The only thing that endures is change, by Heraclitus. While friends in New York dig themselves out of 18 inches of snow, here in California, I walk along the seashore mid-January in short sleeves, wondering if it's ever going to rain again. Cal Fire has cleared brush inland on the mountain, and driving along the backwoods, you can see piles of branches covered with strips of paper ready for the rain we need to begin the burn season. While we wait to set fire to dried out Christmas trees, nature roars on ahead. Big Sur has burned, flames licking the ridge where Kerouac nearly drank himself to death. I've read the same philosophers he studied, a reminder that any good idea I have belongs to others. Nothing is ever truly lost, only changed from one form to another, moved one place to the next. Moments captured as negatives become photographs that I carry from apartment to apartment. My father as a child with his mother when she was still alive. My mother in scuba gear, a snapshot taken by her father the year before his death. One of me and my brother at the beach as boys collecting sea glass. Today, I'm free to walk along that coastline, listening to the gulls, their cries that seem to shriek, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive.
Thank you. That was wonderful. We're going to move on to Paul. Paul, you're next. If you wouldn't mind, the question that we'd like to ask you, we've been going through some interesting times the past few years. And so I'm just kind of curious, does writing become your escape, or does it impact your writing?
So neither, actually, in that way. I'd say that writing is a place in which I connect backwards and forwards in time for myself and for what I've read. And unlike Jake, I'm going to come to your question more. I write every day. It's my job. I don't write well every day, which and not all of it comes out. We have editors for that, and I edit myself. But I'm used to having a job, and I picked my retirement serendipitously almost exactly at the start of the pandemic. So it wasn't so hard to say, okay, I'm getting up today. I'm going to spend time reading poetry across time and space and people that I wouldn't normally read and whatever, integrate some of that. I'm going to write things that just come to me. And so that does mean that I'm interacting with the world and engaging in it and looking at it in different ways. Or I think you asked in what was going to be one of your slides where you involved environmentalism or whatever. Indirectly, for me, I'm not a didactic poet generally, although there could be some argument about that. But there will be, for example, a poem in this Heal the Earth series that Silver Birch Press is doing. That's coming sometime in the next few weeks. So there's that. There are poems that reflect on inequities that went on growing up that show up in this kind of thing too. But more often, I'm interested in some other kinds of exploration there. And also, it takes me several years to really integrate that kind of thing, to really understand it. So I know enough about me and my tribe. We get things eventually, but not like right off. So I'm not much of a journal poet, which I say I don't wake up and say, oh, this is what happened to me today, or I go for a walk and reflect on it. I admire people that do that kind of thing and that can center themselves and that kind of thing. But I kind of try to look in a different mirror for different ways of having the world come back to me and trying to understand self than personal journal, for example, but to broaden it so that the mirror comes in a different way. I admire people that do that. There's nothing. I have a big tent of poetry appreciation and my own narrower tent in which I try to stay out of my own right.
And thank you. It's a lovely perspective on how you write. Would you mind sharing a poem or two with us?
Okay, this one is called Bread. Pick up a round of bread and tear it. All the mountains you see are snowy, and the valleys too. The glow of it is as if winter had been waiting there in regularity, its need to own the earth, to remake landscapes, a world where nothing that is cut bleeds. The edges of this world rise like snakes. Look closely and see their fangs and scales. They're dragons at world's edge, always awake. Some have grown brown wings and sweeping tails. Bread's ragged edges are periphery. The crust holds in the bread's true mysteries, the charmed life of yeast and all that entails. Yeast, many charms. What does that entail? Their gasps give bread its rising mystery. Gases grow in gluten's periphery. Neither plant nor animal, no heads nor tails. Water, grain, and a little warmth wake these beasts without skin, feathers, or scales. In their house of dough, they writhe like snakes. They die when bread is baked, but never bleed, as their bodies build unique landscapes, mountains and caves you hope for as you knead, wishing winter into the dough. There, inside the browning crust, yeast grows in fits. Yeast, in half an hour, make their snowy scenes. Thank the yeast, raise the bread, and tear it.
Mm-hmm.
And do I do two or one?
Another one.
Okay. That one, just for people that are keeping their formal score, is a hinged double sonnet that we just heard. This next one is called Red Clay Way. Here vowels form furrows, bite deep into the red clay, stretch their length across the field. Words seem relaxed, more real, after working a full day. They try to ask what we know, what we plan for tomorrow. The slow roll of what we say is honed in the land we till. So many of us by now have wandered far from the plow. In our lives, some sounds stay, still reach back to early speech, to stories we must tell that follow us like hellhounds that will never lose our trail.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to go and kind of hit up Mr. Peeler now, if you don't mind, Paul. Tim. And we have a question for you. And you've been writing for many years, poetry in particular. Is there a particular poem that someone would say, oh, that is such a Peeler poem? That, something that defines Tim as a poet? Maybe there's more than one. I'm just kind of curious.
That's a hard call to make. I wrote a poem when I was 25 years old called Curt Flood, which was about the baseball player Curt Flood and his battle against the reserve clause in Major League Baseball and all the things he went through. And the poem has been anthologized 3 or 4 times, and it ended up being published at the end of his biography while he was still alive, which made me feel pretty good. And I had a couple people tell me that I would be remembered as the person that wrote the Curt Flood poem, for whatever that's worth. There's another baseball poem called Aunt Lucille that George Mitrovich posted in his baseball notes 2 or 3 times. And it was the reason that I got invited to go up and read at Fenway. And Dick Enberg heard the poem and had instructions that it be read at his memorial service. And then it was read at his memorial service in the stadium at San Diego. and broadcast on Fox Sports. So that poem definitely got out there more than anything else I've ever written. And I don't even know that it's that good, but I guess if it has to do with how something has been out there and been circulated, then it's probably not.
Wow, that's pretty exciting, Tim. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. We always end up asking the right questions of the right person, so that's a good one. Could you grace us with some poems?
Yeah, I'm gonna read something else from this book on these two crazy people. And let's see. I'm sorry. I should have read.
Watch it now. Don't read any of them bad ones now.
Shut up, Rob. Okay, anyway, this book is about this guy named Jesus Duende, who is a former Canadian football player who played his college days at Duke and then came back to the Hickory area and went to work for this country gangster who they called Drunkle. His name is Daryl Runkle. And this guy has bought the Henry River Mill Village, which was where they filmed District 12 and the Hunger Games movies. And he hates the Hunger Games visitors that come and tear the place up, wanting to get pieces of it to take back home and so forth. So at the time I was writing this book, I was also reading Alden's selected poems. So I was being influenced by rhyme poetry. So I put some little rhyme poems here near the end of the book. And let's see, one page too far. And this is one of them, and it's kind of a joke on the idea of the Hunger Games being filmed there because it was filmed by the company Lionsgate. So Drunkle had a Lionsgate put at the mouth of the village where he came into it, and that's what this poem is about. Drunkle bought 2 8-foot pillars of stone and perched upon them as on a throne, heraldic lions all crouched to leap at whatever fool disturbed their keep. By the store's entrance they formed a gate. The sun slipped through it when it grew late. And I'm gonna read one more quick one. And this goes back kind of to where we're on that last one. Drunkle has sent Jesus to find out what Enormous Little was up to down in the river gorge. And Jesus is 6'5", 310 pounds. So this guy is climbing down the bank of the river gorge, and that's what this poem's about. Jesus began the descent on the north side of the bluff, carefully digging his heels into the leaves and mud, working down as quietly as possible, though all he could hear beyond the heartbeat in his ears was the roar of the river rushing across a musical bed of stair-step stones toward what sounded like a drop-off in a pool. He stifled a curse when he caught his left ankle on a hidden rusted strand of barbed wire. He moved through pockets of warm and cool air, over broken limbs and slick patches of moss. Near the bottom, he stepped beside a huge, perfectly straight poplar. A rusted cable wrapped around it had bitten 2 inches into the trunk. We'll move on to the next person.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. You know, at this point, I'm just so proud. We've had 5 poets that each did 2 poems twice. So that's 20 poems in a little over an hour. It's not bad, guys. I thought what we would do next, if it's okay with everyone, take this spotlight off of you. And if anyone has questions, this is a perfect time. You can unmute yourself. You can ask a question to all, someone, doesn't really matter if you've got them. And I'm also, as you're thinking about that question, I'm going to put my publisher and editor on the spot, Robert Knipe. I'd like to introduce him. He is our chief editor at Redhawk Publications. And many of the times he's not only editing folks when they submit their manuscripts. He's also partially doing layouts, and he's also helping with the business end. So without him, we wouldn't be here. Robert, is there anything you'd like to say about how things have been going and thoughts on our poets this evening?
I don't know how well you can hear me because this setup I've got here at home is not
Hear you fine.
the best.
Hear you perfectly. Hear
Yeah,
you fine.
I do know that a Microsoft camera will not work in an iMac, so that's why the camera's been all funky. But anyway, we are very, very fortunate at Catawba Valley Community College to have been able to open this opportunity to publish such great talent. I listen to you guys read. I read your stuff when I'm laying it out. I talk to you, you know, as we're trying to sell it at different venues and things like that. And it's oftentimes seemingly a thankless kind of exercise. But when you think about it, though, I think our stable of poets and our stable of writers, but especially our poets, are some of the most talented and learned and erudite people that I have had the pleasure to meet. Especially the last 10 or 15 poets that we've published. A lot of the people that are here, just wonderful, wonderful work, you guys. I wish I could do it. I always knew that I loved to write, but I found out I was a better editor than I was a writer, because I can take other people's stuff sometimes and give it that extra bit that it really needs. But I just want to tell all of you how much I've enjoyed working with you through your projects. And I look forward to doing more projects with you and for you if you will honor us with that opportunity. And Jake, if you would have told me like months ago that this was like your dissertation piece, I wouldn't have been nearly as hard to get along with some of the things that we argued about.
That's funny. Yeah, I had no idea, but again, the strangest
Well,
things
now-
happen.
Now I can see why he didn't want the advertisements for the book in it, and you know, some of the things he was doing, because you know he had a very specific thesis that he wanted to follow concerning the book with all of the epigrams and stuff like that. Because I would go like, "Gosh, Jake, let's get rid of some of these epigrams," and then so now that all makes sense. So sorry for being so hard to get along with.
That's funny. Hey, you know what? I've been remiss. We only had 18 poems. Miss Schereeya owes us 2 more, and I'm not going to forget it. So we're going to put her back up on spot so we can get our money's worth here.
Thank you, Patty. I will keep them short. The first is called Serenity, and it was the prompt for this. It was a commission that the prompt was a poem about nighttime. Silver trees whistle, moonlace edged leaves whisper wisdom in the wind. Wake, wake. Even my eyelashes scatter silver as I stir. Some nights are darker than this. Some nights the dark is cooling, comforting, collecting me in her arms. With eyes closed, I hear, I feel, I am the night. The night kisses me, a playful peck placed precisely between my eyes. Some nights are darker than this, but tonight her grace bestows blessed beams. Silver trees whistle past me. Velvet moss a springboard for my toes. Crickets, the string section of the nightly orchestra, play for me my favorite melody. Toads keep the time. Their bass line bangs as one with my own heartbeat. Together we sing back to the moon. And for the last
Yeah,
one,
that's just good stuff right there. That's just good stuff.
thank you. For the last one, I will read as well from Prayers and Pixies just to save on time. But I mentioned earlier one that was written for like an engagement, I don't know, ceremony. It was for an engagement during the proposal. I don't know if you've ever been to Lexington, Virginia. It's in the Shenandoah Valley. And on Washington and Lee, there's these old red bricks that are just like part of the tradition of being there on campus. And they go all the way up the colonnade from the main buildings on campus, all the way up through the university chapel at the end. So that imagery is important. Number 20, forever is but a moment. Nothing pleases like the bite of October. It brings whiffs of fire, of barbecue on the green, of corn on the cob, and wine in one of those plastic stemmed glasses. Love permeates the air, and I don't need to smell it, for it saturates my being like dew on the fuzzy legs of a pollinator. The red bricks that brought me to you sang the same song of love under my feet, a tattoo to match my heart song. Be with me, stay with me, here, in this moment, in this breath. White columns behind or before us matter not, as long as we can stand as one, as long as we both shall choose. Thank you.
That's really lovely. Thank you, Schereeya. I just feel so honored to have so many talented people here. Even Shelby, we finally can see you, Mr. Stevenson. Well, and you know what? I don't like keeping things longer than they need to be, and we've made it to 7:15, and we have gotten our 20 poems. At this point, if there are no questions, I'm just going to let everybody go to bed. Thank you all for coming. It means a lot to Robert and myself and Tim and Aurora, who's here as well. We've had a wonderful time. This has been recorded, so if you know of anyone that didn't get a chance to see this, please let me know. I'll make sure that we keep our recording of this. Have a wonderful evening, and more importantly, have a wonderful holiday season, whatever season you celebrate. We hope you celebrate it peacefully, healthily, and we look forward to a prosperous 2022, maybe without COVID. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.
And
Bye-bye. Thank you.
send our website address to all your friends where you can get more royalties, and Jeff Bezos won't send more people to the moon.
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Paul and Jake and Mary and Schereeya, thank you all. This was wonderful.
Patty, thank you so much. This was such a treat.
It really was. It was fun. We should do this more often.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
No
thank
problem.
you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Wonderful. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.